When 28-year-old caregiver Emma Clark took a high-paying job caring for a paralyzed billionaire in a lonely Hamptons mansion, she thought it would be just another paycheck. But behind James Whitmore's cold silence and steel blue eyes was a man scarred by more than just the crash that stole his body. In the quiet steam of the bathroom, in late-night conversations and lingering glances, something began to bloom. Soft, slow, and dangerously real. What started as a job soon became the love neither of them believed they deserved. She touched his skin with gentle hands, and somehow reached his soul. Emma Clark had grown used to disappointment. At 28, she was worn thin from working 2 jobs in rural Pennsylvania, waitressing during the day and caring for the elderly at night. Her hands were always tired, her back sore, and her heart heavy. But through it all, she smiled for her 6-year-old son, Aiden. He was her reason, her everything. She didn't expect miracles. Life had taught her not to. So when she got a call from a luxury caregiving agency based in New York City, she nearly hung up. The woman on the line spoke with an elegance that didn't match Emma's world. "Miss Clark," the woman had said, "we've reviewed your file. You come highly recommended. We have a private client in urgent need of a live-in caregiver. Compensation begins at $10,000 a month. Housing included. Immediate start." Emma's heart nearly stopped. "10,000?" she whispered, clutching the cracked phone in her kitchen, barely able to hear over the hum of the fridge and the sound of Aiden watching cartoons. It had to be a scam. Too good, too shiny. But something in the woman's voice felt real, gentle, professional. "The client's name is James Whitmore," the woman continued. "He was paralyzed in a car crash 2 years ago. He requires full-time assistance. You'll be living on site in the Hamptons. Will that be a problem?" James Whitmore. The name rang a bell. Emma rushed to Google him that night, and there he was, on every old headline and tech article. Once the youngest tech billionaire in the country, a Silicon Valley legend, handsome, sharp, arrogant. Then 2 years ago, he vanished from the public eye after a tragic accident. No updates, no pictures. Rumors swirled that he was brain dead. Others said he was in hiding. Now she knew the truth. Paralyzed, alone, and looking for help. Emma stared at her son as he slept that night, a soft wheeze in his tiny chest. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "Mommy's going to make things better." 3 days later, she hugged Aiden tight and handed him to her sister, promising she'd call every night. She packed her few belongings, leaving behind her small town and all its worn-down dreams. Her car barely made it down the long highway to the Hamptons, the engine coughing like it didn't believe in the future either. And then there it was. The Whitmore estate looked like a castle built by cold hands. Glass, stone, and silence. Ivy crawled up the sides like it was trying to escape. Security gates creaked open slowly, and the massive front door loomed like it had swallowed joy years ago. A butler opened the door, stiff and polite. "Miss Clark, follow me." No welcome, no warmth. The inside was worse. It smelled like old wood and loneliness. The lights were dim and the air felt heavy, like the walls were holding secrets no one had dared to speak aloud. Every hallway echoed, every clock ticked too loud. Emma was taken to her room, simple, clean, and cold. Then, without warning, the butler handed her a clipboard. "This is Mr. Whitmore's schedule. You will assist him with bathing, dressing, feeding, and physical adjustments every 6 hours." Emma blinked. "Bathing?" The butler didn't even flinch. "He cannot move from the neck down. We expect discretion and silence." That night, she lay awake in her new room, staring at the ceiling. She had thought this would be her chance, her break, her escape from paycheck to paycheck hell. But now something felt wrong. The house didn't just feel rich, it felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by grief, by something deeper, a tragedy that never healed. She hadn't even met James yet, but somehow she could feel him, somewhere beyond the stone walls, hidden in the shadows, waiting, and she had no idea how much her life was about to change. The first time Emma saw James Whitmore, she froze. Not out of fear, but shock. She'd imagined a man in his 70s, frail, tired, clinging to dignity. That's what her previous clients had been like. But James? He was 35, still young, still devastatingly handsome, and yet he didn't look alive. His jaw was sharp, sculpted like marble. His skin was pale, untouched by sunlight. His dark hair was grown out, just messy enough to suggest no one had touched it in weeks. His frame was tall, lean, what would have once made him commanding in a boardroom. But he didn't move, not even an inch. His eyes, icy blue like cracked glass, followed her the moment she stepped into his private suite. They were the only thing that had life in them. And even they didn't blink. He lay in a custom-designed wheelchair bed hybrid, surrounded by silence and expensive machines. No TV, no music, just him and the haunting hum of medical monitors. Emma felt her throat tighten. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice careful, respectful. "I'm Emma Clark. I'll be your new caregiver." He didn't respond, he just stared. Not in judgment, not in fear, but like she didn't exist. "I'll be helping you with your routine today, starting with bathing, if that's all right?" Still nothing. Emma moved gently, setting out warm towels, soft cloths, and the lavender-scented soap she'd brought herself. She'd hoped the scent might soften the room's bitter air. As she reached out to undo the top button of his shirt, his voice cut through the silence. "Don't touch me like I'm a child." It was sharp, harsh, cold. Emma froze. His voice was deep, worn, like it hadn't been used in days, maybe weeks. She swallowed. I'm just doing my job, Mr. Whitmore." His eyes locked onto hers. There was fire in them, but not directed at her. It was pain, rage, shame, all twisted into one look. "I don't need pity," he added. "I'm not giving you any," she replied, surprising herself with the steadiness in her tone. She continued, slowly, gently. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a body that had once been strong but was now thin, unmoving. Scars ran along his ribs and across his collarbone. He flinched when the cloth touched his skin, though she used barely any pressure. Emma didn't speak again. She focused on the task, careful, respectful, quiet. When she was done, she wrapped him in a warm towel, dried his skin like a whisper, and gently redressed him. Still, not a word from him. Not a single thank you. Not even a blink of warmth. That night, Emma sat in her room, staring at the ceiling, tears sliding down her cheeks. Not because of what he said, not because he snapped at her, but because of what she saw. A man who had once ruled boardrooms with brilliance and confidence, now locked in his own body. A man who had once smiled on magazine covers beside a woman he loved, now silenced by guilt and grief. He wasn't just paralyzed in body, he was paralyzed in spirit. A ghost of a man who still breathed, but didn't believe he had the right to. Emma wiped her tears. Something in her had shifted. She didn't know him, but she saw through him. And beneath the anger, beneath the arrogance, there was a man who hadn't let anyone in for far too long. And maybe, just maybe, that was why fate had brought her here. Time passed slowly in the Whitmore estate. Days melted into nights like cold candle wax, quiet and heavy. For weeks, James barely spoke, not one word. Emma followed her routine like clockwork. She arrived each morning with fresh linens and soft words. She fed him patiently, cleaned him with gentle hands, turned him in bed with the grace of someone used to caring for others who had forgotten how to care for themselves. She talked, not because she expected him to answer, but because silence had a way of killing the soul faster than any injury. So she spoke softly, like someone planting seeds in a frozen garden. "I used to dream of living near the ocean," she'd whisper as she adjusted his pillows. "Aiden, my son, he wants to be a space explorer. He doesn't even know how to swim yet." She chuckled at her own words, even when James didn't react. She read aloud in the evenings, her voice a lullaby in the cold mansion. Sometimes poetry, sometimes old novels. Once, she read a line that made her pause. "The body is but a shell. It is the heart that aches when no one sees you." Still, James said nothing. But Emma knew. She felt it. He was listening. Then one night, everything changed. It was late. The storm outside was beating against the windows, thunder rolling like distant grief. Emma sat beside him, gently wiping his hands with warm cloths, as she always did before bed. Her fingers moved slowly across his skin, lingering just a second longer than necessary, not out of duty, but something quieter, something unspoken. And then his lips moved. "Your son," he whispered, voice like rusted silk. "What's his name?" Emma froze. Her heart stumbled in her chest. She looked up into those glacier blue eyes, which now looked more like melting ice. "Aiden," she said, her voice barely a breath. "He's 6. He loves peanut butter more than people." James let out a sound that was almost a laugh, but not quite. It cracked the air. That night she stayed, not as a caregiver, but as something different, maybe the first real connection James had allowed himself in years. They talked for hours. He told her about the crash, how they were driving home from a gala, how the roads were slick, how the last thing he remembered was his fiancée laughing at something he said. And then screaming, metal tearing, then silence. "I remember waking up in a hospital. Couldn't move, couldn't speak, and she was gone." His voice broke like a man remembering his own funeral. "No one could explain the cause, no drinking, no other car, just brake failure, they said, but I've never believed it." Emma didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just reached for his hand. And this time he didn't flinch. That small moment, skin to skin, held more intimacy than most people feel in a lifetime. From that night on, something shifted. James began to eat more. He asked questions. He even requested a book. "The Old Man and the Sea," he said. "I used to love it." He smiled once, just once, but it nearly undid her. Emma began to see shadows of the man he had been, not the billionaire, not the recluse, but the boy underneath it all, the one who had once believed in the world. And James? He began to see her too, not as staff, not as charity, but as the first person in years who saw him, not just the chair. The walls were cracking, and for the first time in 2 years, light was beginning to seep in. By the 3rd month, Emma had memorized the rhythm of the house. She knew the creak of the 3rd stair, the soft click of James's breathing machine at midnight, the way the curtains moved slightly even when the windows were closed. She thought she'd adjusted to the eerie calm of the Whitmore estate. But then things began to feel off. It started with Logan. James's younger brother, full of sharp suits and fake smiles, visited once or twice a week. He always brought expensive cigars, made jokes James never laughed at, and insisted on private meetings with the estate's legal staff. Emma kept her distance until she noticed things he didn't mean for her to see. One afternoon, while changing James's sheets, she overheard Logan on a call in the hallway. "I don't care if he signs it next week or next month," Logan hissed. "He's not going to live forever, and when he's gone, that company is mine." Emma's heart dropped. Later that night, she passed the home office and found the computer left open, financial spreadsheets loaded, dozens of transfers, ownership documents, and something far worse. A line of text under James's name that read, "Transfer of authority pending medical reassessment." Logan wasn't just visiting. He was circling. Emma didn't sleep that night. She sat by James's bed, watching him as he slept, his face no longer hardened but vulnerable, peaceful. She wondered how much he knew, or how much he was afraid to say. The next morning, over a quiet breakfast, James said softly, "I saw the look on your face last night." Emma hesitated, then sat down beside him. "James, do you trust your brother?" His eyes dropped, and for the first time in days, the cold returned. "I used to," he said, "before the crash." There was silence and then a slow, weighted confession. "I've had doubts about that night, about whether the crash was really accidental." His voice cracked at the edges, as if he were scared of the truth. "I never had proof, just a feeling. And no one would believe the man in the chair, right?" Emma leaned in, her eyes steady. "I would." He turned to her, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. She didn't wait. Emma began digging. By day, she continued her caregiving like nothing had changed. But at night, she pored over James's archived emails, tracked old insurance statements, and made quiet calls to auto shops and forensic experts. She even hacked, yes, hacked, into the cloud storage of Whitmore Industries, using passwords James half-remembered from before the accident. And what she found chilled her to the bone. A digital invoice from a private mechanic, marked confidential. A single line item, brake line adjustment, delay function installed. The mechanic was paid through a ghost company. And that company linked directly to Logan Whitmore. Emma's hands trembled. It wasn't supposed to kill James, just scare him, push him into early retirement, make him hand over the empire. But something went wrong. And instead of fear, the crash gave James silence, immobility, death of a different kind. Emma brought the evidence to him, printed and highlighted, her breath shaky. She didn't speak right away, just laid the papers in his lap. James read each word slowly, his jaw tightening, his eyes burning with something she hadn't seen before. When he looked up at her, he wasn't angry. He wasn't broken. He was grateful. "You saved my life," he whispered. His voice cracked. Again. They shared a silence deeper than words. And in that silence, something passed between them. Raw, real, and forever unspoken. Trust, bond, maybe even love in its earliest, most unspoken form. Together, they contacted a lawyer. 2 weeks later, Logan was arrested on charges of attempted fraud, endangerment, and corporate conspiracy. The press exploded. The Whitmore name was back on every headline, but this time James didn't face it alone. Emma sat beside him during every legal meeting, every press inquiry, every stare from people who only saw his wheelchair, not his strength. And through it all, she stayed, not because she had to, but because her heart was already too far in to walk away. The mansion didn't change overnight, but James did. After Logan's arrest, the house felt different, like it could finally breathe again. The walls that once echoed with silence now carried whispers of hope. The cold stone halls began to feel warm, simply because James had chosen to live, not just survive. It started small. One morning, Emma found him already awake, eyes turned toward the window. The sun had barely risen. "Will you take me outside today?" he asked. She blinked, caught off guard. "Of course," she smiled. "I thought you hated the outdoors. I think I just forgot how it felt." She wheeled him into the garden for the first time since her arrival. The wind was crisp, the scent of pine and earth dancing through the hedges. Birds chirped from the naked trees, and James sat silently. His face turned toward the warmth of the morning sun, like he hadn't felt it in years. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply. For the first time, he looked at peace. From then on, it became routine. Every morning, she took him outside. Sometimes she read to him. Sometimes they sat in silence. Sometimes they talked for hours about nothing: music, childhood, movies they loved, places they'd never been. And laughter came back. It started with a crooked smile over a shared joke about the butler's stiff posture. Then came full laughter, unexpected and boyish, when Emma accidentally sprayed herself with the garden hose. Emma's walls came down too. She no longer saw James as Mr. Whitmore. He was just James now. A man with pain, yes, but also with courage, with curiosity, with soul. Their connection deepened, unspoken but unmistakable. He started asking her personal questions. "What was your first heartbreak? What's Aiden's favorite bedtime story? Do you ever think about starting over?" Emma answered honestly, not with rehearsed words, but from her heart. And every time their eyes met, it lingered longer. A soft moment, a shared silence. Something blooming neither of them dared name. Then came the day Aiden visited. Emma was nervous. She'd missed him terribly. But she was also unsure. How would James react to a noisy, curious little boy bouncing around his quiet world? But James lit up the moment he saw him. "Hi," Aiden grinned, running over. "Are you the robot man?" Emma gasped. "Aiden!" James let out a laugh, pure, genuine. "I've been called worse." James felt something he thought was lost to him forever. Family. And Emma? She watched the two of them and felt her heart swell with something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Then came Christmas Eve. Snow blanketed the estate like powdered sugar. The fireplace crackled. The air was thick with cinnamon and memory. Emma tucked Aiden into bed and returned to James's room, only to find a small velvet box on his lap. "Merry Christmas," he said quietly, eyes flicking toward hers with a nervousness she hadn't seen before. She opened it slowly. Inside was a locket, silver, delicate. On one side was a tiny photo of her and Aiden, taken one summer evening. On the other side, engraved in soft cursive, were the words, "You made me human again." Her breath caught. She pressed the locket to her chest as tears welled in her eyes. "James," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I mean it," he said, barely above a whisper. "I was alive, but I wasn't living until you." She stepped closer, her hands trembling as she wiped her cheek. And for the first time since the crash, James cried too. Not out of pain, not out of loss, but because someone had reached into the cold, broken shell of him and pulled him back into the light. 1 year later, the world saw a different James Whitmore. The name that once filled Forbes covers and courtrooms had returned, but not to boast or build billion-dollar empires. This time, James stood, metaphorically, if not physically, at a podium before a crowd of reporters, families, and dreamers. His eyes no longer held the hollow stare of a man lost. They sparkled now, even under the glare of flashing cameras. Beside him stood Emma, not behind him, not in uniform, but shoulder to shoulder, where she belonged. Her hair curled softly over her collar, her hand resting lightly on the armrest of James's chair. A quiet strength radiated from her. No title on a name badge could capture what she was to him now. The crowd hushed as James leaned into the microphone. "I used to think my life ended 2 years ago," he began. "I lost movement. I lost someone I loved. I lost control over everything that defined me. But what I didn't realize was that what came after would matter more." He paused. His voice wavered, but only slightly. "I want to introduce you to the Whitmore Hope Project," he continued. "It's a foundation built to support those who have lost mobility and those who care for them. Caregivers like Emma, who didn't just bathe me, feed me, or keep me alive, but who reminded me that I was still a man, still whole, still worth loving." Emma's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry this time. She stood steady, proud. Applause filled the room, not just for the foundation, but for the quiet revolution unfolding before their eyes. A man once dismissed as broken, standing strong through the love and faith of a woman's society, once called just a caregiver. Over the next few months, the foundation exploded with support. Families from across the country wrote in, thanking James and Emma for making them feel seen. The money James once hoarded in silence now poured into therapy programs, caregiver salaries, and adaptive technology. But it wasn't the headlines or money that meant the most to either of them. It was the simple mornings. The way Emma handed James his coffee with 2 hands, one for the cup and one for his. The way Aiden climbed into James's lap after school like he'd always belonged there. The way James started sleeping better, not because his pain was gone, but because he wasn't alone anymore. They never made a grand announcement. No flashy Instagram post, no diamond ring reveal. They didn't need to. Their love wasn't made of spectacle. It was made of glances across a quiet room, of shared smiles after long days, of whispered conversations at midnight when Emma would rest her head on James's shoulder and he'd whisper, "Stay a little longer," even though she never planned on leaving. People noticed, but more than that, people felt it. The woman who once carried towels and worries now carried his heart. The man who once couldn't lift a finger now lifted spirits wherever he went. Emma taught him that love wasn't about saving someone. It was about standing beside them even when the world stops looking. And James? He showed her that even the most shattered souls can still build something beautiful when given time, trust, and someone who truly believes. On a quiet spring evening, James and Emma sat together in the garden where it had all begun. Birds flitted through the trees, and Aiden played with toy rockets in the grass. Emma reached over and touched the chain around her neck, the silver locket he had given her a year ago. James glanced at her and smiled. "Do you remember what I wrote inside it?" Emma nodded. You made me human again. He looked at her, his voice soft but certain. No, you made me feel loved again. They sat in silence, holding hands as the sun dipped below the trees. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Because finally, after all the pain, all the loss, all the trials, they weren't just surviving anymore. They were living together.